During the last 2 weeks, the hearing has raced through more than 20,000 pages of documents, hearing evidence from both sides about environmental concerns, the visual impact of the scheme and the potential loss of tourism revenue. In particular, why the developer has chosen to site the wind farm against government advice within 12 miles of the shore.
The scheme, as far as we're concerned, is quite ridiculous. If you had to put a wind farm somewhere around the UK coast, you couldn't pick a more sensitive site than this one. It's too big, it's too close, and it's totally in the wrong location.
It's highly political too. The planning inspector will make the final decision next September, after the general election.
With us now is Iain Mckie, the Ukip candidate for the Isle of Wight in next year's general election, and someone who's worked in the financial side of the energy industry. Iain, on the global warming point, is that being missed, do you think, in the detail of this examination in Bournemouth?
I think the chief concern has got to be on the finances here. Now, baseload power, coal, which we depend upon for most of our generation needs, produces power at £40 a megawatt hour. According to the Crown Estate, the offshore wind farms will generate power at £140 to £150 a megawatt hour. That difference of £100 a megawatt hour, if I then apply that to the size on the Navitas Bay, which would be 940 megawatts multiplied by 24 for the hours, multiplied by 365, multiplied by 100, gives us a grand total of £865 million in subsidies, which are required for this project to go ahead.
But that's what governments do. They subsidise things like this in order to get the initial investment going, in order to make it economic and efficient in the longer term. You can't do it in the short term.
But that £865 million will be felt through all of our household bills. Now, since power demand peaked in 2007, coal pipe prices have dropped from $220 a tonne to about $75 a tonne. NBP gas has dropped from 90 pence a therm to around about 50 pence a therm. And wholesale UK power prices have dropped from £70 a megawatt hour down to 40. Yet at the same time, household bills have gone up by 140%. So all of that money is being sucked out of the power consumer, which hits the low-income households proportionally higher than the better off people. It's hitting the older people much harder, and that money is being sucked out at their expense.
Just take the longer-term view, though. Climate change would cost us all so much more, wouldn't it, unless we address it and cut back on carbon emissions?
Do we actually know that carbon emissions are causing climate change?
Yes.
Yes. I think you'll find not.
98% consensus in scientific consensus.
There is no such thing as scientific consensus. There's only such a thing as scientific fact. There is political consensus, which is being used to cherry-pick items, and that was what came out of the leaks from the University of East Anglia. The politicians are cherry-picking the scientific evidence that fits in their political agenda.
This is no more politicians cherry-picking the evidence than politicians deciding that cigarette smoking causes cancer. It's that strength of scientific opinion. The peer-reviewed evidence by the scientists around the world overwhelmingly tell us that climate change is happening. And in this county, places like Hayling Island, Portsmouth, Southampton, Lymington, they will pay the price if we don't deal with this now, because we can't leave it for our children and our grandchildren, because it takes too long to turn it round. If we don't get back behind schemes like this one, then our selfishness and our ignorance will leave a huge price for future generations to pay. And I think politicians, even if it's unpopular, I actually back the Navitas Bay proposals, but I can see it's unpopular.
It is absolutely unpopular. You've got all the local councils against it.
But if we don't do it, then how on earth are we going to play our role in playing climate change? There's nothing bigger in politics than this issue.
And it trumps, you believe, for example, UNESCO saying it would lose a site of world heritage.
Well,
it's surely in the wrong place.
Well, find somewhere else. And you've got the County Council in Hampshire saying, not on our land, not about planning consideration, nowhere. We're not going to back it. Now, if we all say no to everywhere, we won't deal with climate change.
So you would say go ahead with it? You're behind it.
Obviously there's lots of detail for the inquiry, but in principle, yes, I would. I would go ahead.
I agree with John in terms of the issue around climate change, and I totally disagree with Iain. I think it's a waste of time even arguing about it. If you look at the scientific evidence, it's there. Where I do disagree is I don't necessarily think that wind is the answer. If people don't want it, then it's not the answer. But then we have to come forward with other renewable energy ideas. And for me, the biggest issue here is our complete disregard and lack of investment in nuclear. You know, we've got Hinkley Point, which is going to supply 7%. That's a huge amount from one power, 7% of our energy in the future. And I think we should be investing far more there. But make no mistake, it requires investment and it requires subsidy. All energy production requires subsidy. It's just a question of what level you take it at. And I listen to that voice from the people which says, we do not like wind. And we've got waves, we've got tidal power, we've got all kinds of other things. We've got carbon capture and storage, which we're actually leaders, not just in Europe, but in the world, in the technology. There are all sorts of ways of doing this, but it's not that you don't do it because there is no climate problem.
I just want to bring Iain back in again.
I'm just going to pick up on one point there. You're saying that sort of, if you want to decarbonise the energy sector, you'll go for more nuclear builds, right? Now, can you tell me, if you believe in global warming, then presumably sea levels are rising. Why are you building Hinkley Point that close to the sea? Will it not just fall into the ocean?
No, I believe with responsible politicians, with people who take these things seriously, we will be able to hold ourselves at the 2-degree increase. That's what we're aiming at. But we have to go for it.
Then I wish the government had set a 2030 target to decarbonise. One of our problems, and that will include the investors in Navitas Bay, it's not clear what the government wants us to achieve by when, and that makes it hugely difficult for people to mobilise the money that's needed. A binding target, because that gives the market certainty. And actually, yes, of course, it's not for ministers to say it's all got to be wind or all got to be this. You need a mix, and to some extent the market has got to decide what that mix is going to be.
This is where we have to leave it.
I think we've been leading on that, and we've certainly been leading in Europe on the push for the 2030 package, and for we've got a carbon floor price in this country, which, you know, is pretty. That's
OK.
pretty good, I think.
Thank you all, and thank you, Iain, for coming in.
Thank you.
It's 2 years this month since the country's first police and crime